Thank you, Madam President, for your time in this tense and very difficult moment for Georgia.
Thank you.
Protests after Georgian parliament adopted the foreign agent bill are gaining strength. You as well strongly oppose this law. What does this new law mean for your country?
Well, this law is unacceptable both in essence, in its form, and in the consequences that it can have. So in its essence, it's a Russian-type law because it's there to impose controls, intimidation, repression on the civil society, on the non-governmental organizations that are really at the core of everything, of the democratic construction of Georgia all over the past years since we became independent. And it's putting that under question. It's putting it under question at a time when we are entering an electoral phase because we have next elections in October of this year. And that means that those organizations that are in charge of observation, of defending the rights of the citizens will be those that will be intimidated and limited in their finances as well as in general in their activities in the society. So it's exactly a copy of a Russian law that was adopted that in Russia had the effect of really destroying the civil society. And to see it introduced in Georgia now does not make any sense, even less so because last year it was introduced and it was rejected by a vast majority of the population that was demonstrating already then by all our foreign partners, Europeans and Americans, that protested this law and was retrieved by the authorities saying that it was finished, they will never introduce it again. And despite this promise, they lied to their population, they lied to our partners, and at a time when nobody was expecting that, they reintroduced it in a very non-democratic format. The parliamentary discussions were cut short, the opposition was expelled from the whole of the parliament, and this law has been passed despite all these manifestations. There are hundreds of thousands of people that have been demonstrating for now 38 days. And despite that, the authorities do not hear their population, do not hear our partners, those on which depend our European future, because it has to be decided in a very few months. The Commission has to make a proposal, a conclusion, in order to see whether we are allowed to see the opening of the negotiations of accession. So it's a very important time, and Georgia should be working on the reforms that are awaited from Georgia. And instead of that, we have this Russian law that is only creating concern, polarization. It's a provocation to both the population and our partners. And it's accompanied by Russian narrative, Russian speeches from the authorities that are talking to us with conspiracy theories, telling us that our friends are not our friends, but our enemies are our friends, that our partners are supposed to be wanting a second front against Russia, and that they want to subvert the Georgian society, that they want to change our identity, and so on and so forth. You know what are those conspiracy theories. They are very well known in the Kremlin, and we have a copy of that also, repeated from the top to down of the ruling majority. And that is very good.
This new law, as you said, Madam President, is a copy of a Russian foreign agent law, but does Georgian government need this just as a useful tool to control free media, society, or is it a sign of growing Moscow's influence and turn from European aspirations of your country towards Russia?
Yeah, it's difficult to say what is the reason, the cause, and the consequence. What we are dealing with are the facts that nobody can dispute, and the fact is that this law is not necessary for anything. We have had the non-governmental organizations. They are perfectly transparent, and everybody knows what they're doing, what they are helping, in which fields of our economy or our society they are working.
And you have the power. You have the
pursuing other aims.
You have the power to veto this bill, Madam President. Yes. Will you?
Yes, I will veto. But I will veto, it's a political veto. It's the expression, institutional expression of the will of the population that has been expressed on the streets of Tbilisi and of other cities of the country. So I'm just expressing this will in a different institutional way. I know it will be overthrown because the majority is the same. So I'm sure that this monolithic majority of the ruling party will overthrow this veto, but it doesn't really matter because we are now in front of a global issue, which is that we have to go to the elections, and in the elections we have to choose our future, and it has to be very clear for the Georgian population that they have to choose between their European future and the reforms that we have to accelerate, and these type of laws, this Russian law and a few other laws that have been adopted in this very recent past and that are not going in the direction of our European future. That choice will be presented for the elections. We have to prepare them. It has to be peaceful, and that choice has to be very clearly expressed by the Georgian population, and I will be supporting this choice of the Georgian population.
Do you expect more protests, Madam President? And do you see any chance for government to step back?
I don't know, because these protests have been very spontaneous and nobody is really directing them. So it will depend on the decisions of the different groups, especially young people that are organizing these protests. I think that after a time, it will convert into the campaign for the elections, because this campaign will turn into a de facto referendum. So that will mobilize in the same way that now the protests are being mobilized on the streets. I'm sure that that will give the dynamism necessary to mobilize the population for high participation in the elections.
According to Financial Times, European Union is ready to freeze Georgia's accession bid to EU if it enacts Russian-inspired law. Is your country on a crossroad now?
Yes, but I think it's not right, because the decision of the Georgian people today is on the streets. It's very clear what they want. They want their European future. And the institutional way in which they can express that will be the elections. So anything that sanctions the Georgian people or the Georgian nation or the Georgian state before the elections is not right. There should be the warning that if the elections show a different path of Georgia, then the European partners will take other decisions. A different issue are the individual sanctions. It's not for me to comment. I've been saying and underlying that. But clearly what concerned the nation of Georgia and the state of Georgia, that should be something decided only after the Georgians have expressed what they have to say in the elections, in the referendum.
Seeing what happened in Slovakia, the attempt to murder Prime Minister Fico, are you afraid of violence in your very, very divided country?
Our country is not very, very divided. I don't know where you hear that. The population is very united. The political elite is very divided, as it happens in many countries. But the country is united on one thing. There are 80% of the population that wants Europe, and that's what we see when we have demonstrations in this small country for 38 days with more than hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. And they're united on their European future and on the independence of the country. And those two things are linked very much together. They're united because the country has 20% of the territory occupied. So it cannot be otherwise. And that's what we're going to prove in the next elections.
Let me ask you a very last question. It all happens amid Russian offensive in Ukraine, new offensive. What if Ukraine lose this war, Madam President?
I don't think that Ukraine will lose this war. I think that Russia has already lost this war in political terms, even in military terms, because this supposedly very powerful, overall powerful Russian army has not been able to defeat Ukraine in over 2 years' time. And Ukraine had never pretended to have the type of army that Russia was trying to impress the whole of Europe with. So I think that we're going to see different episodes of this war that Russia has started. And I think that in the end, Russia will regret to have ever started this war with Ukraine.
President Salome Zurabishvili of Georgia, thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you.